When you hear the sound of the drums and the sound of the shakeree, you know it's time for the Griot's Storytelling Circle. Come join the circle today. I'm your storyteller, Sister Martha Ruff, and I'm sharing some of the stories that bring us together as a family. It's the holidays, and everyone is gathering, and they might be sharing stories like this one about Aunt Cora on the radio. Some of it is true, and some of it is not true, but all of it is something we remember. It happened back during the time when America was split up into two different worlds. The African American world, where people lived in their own part of town, and the Caucasian world, where people lived in their own part of town, and they just came together in certain places. Aunt Cora worked for the sheriff of the town, a small town in South Carolina, and she was very good at her job, making cakes and pies and all those good things we like at the holidays. And it was right around World War II. And the rest of the world found out what was happening in the United States, how African Americans couldn't go certain places and couldn't eat in certain places. And America wanted to show the world that they were a good place. So the fathers of the town got together and said, how can we show the world that this is a good place? I've got an idea. We'll let a colored woman tell them about it, said the sheriff. Miss Cora works at my house, and she could be a good person to tell the rest of the world how good we treat our colored folks here. And that's what they did. They came on the radio, and they talked about their little southern town and how good African Americans had it in their town. And then they brought on Aunt Cora, a little tiny woman with her apron on, her gray hair, and it's the radio, she said. You want me to talk on the radio? Yes, said the sheriff. Don't worry about it. Everybody around the world is going to hear you, but you won't have to worry about it. Just say what you know is true. So she walked up to this great big microphone. That's what it was like back then in those days. And she still couldn't believe that she was going to be on the radio, but she said, "Is it on? Can they hear me?" Yes, yes, they said, "Go ahead and talk." So Aunt Cora began. She said, "This is Cora Mae Johnson, and I live in South Carolina. And they told me you folks around the world could hear me. And they told me to tell you how good the colored folks have it in this town. Well, I just have one thing to say." And Aunt Cora said, "All I have to say is, help! Help! We need help in this town." And they dragged Aunt Cora off from the radio station, and they never let another colored woman talk on that radio again. They say that's what happened when Aunt Cora was on the radio in 1940s. Well, when you have your family gatherings, don't just sit and stare at the television or look at your cell phones or look at the computer. Spend some time doing something together. There are some easy things that you can do, like make a drum. Gather your children around and find some things that would make a good drum. And this is just a box, used to be a box of grits. And with the lid that's on it, you could just make a drum. Or you can make it into a shakeré by putting some small pebbles inside. And then, with the pebbles inside, you can, and you'll have instruments just like I have for telling stories and swapping tales at your family gathering. Now, don't forget to make some decorations on your drum or your instrument. Africans always made their everyday things have special decorations and designs. Now, when you have your family gathering, you might tell a story like one from my family, and I became a griot. One of the people that influenced me was my grandmother, Gover. Edna Gover grew up in the early 1900s in Baltimore City, and she was a teacher. She went to Teachers College, and then she got married. And do you know, in those days when you got married, you could not be a teacher anymore. She married a man who lived on a farm, and so she went to live on the farm. And they got married, not in a big church with a lot of people. They got married in her living room with a preacher and her family and his family. Couldn't have a lot of people in a small house. And after she left Baltimore City and went to the country to live on the farm, the people who lived around the farm area wanted to come and see the new couple. And so they gathered out on the lawn outside the house. And they had tables filled with food. You know what they had: potato salad and ham and chicken. Oh, of course they had pound cake and all kinds of cherry pies and apple pies, because they grew apple, they had apple trees on that farm. And all the people gathered around the porch of the house because the house was too small for everybody to come inside, so they were having the gathering outside on the lawn. And where was the bride and groom? It was time for a party, and they couldn't party without the bride and groom. Edna Gover and Stanley Gover were inside the house, and they decided the best way to get them out was to call them. And so they did. Everybody said, "We want the bride. We want the groom. We want the bride. We want the groom." And the door opened, and out came his mother. They said, "No, we want the bride. We want the groom." And the mother came out and said, "Okay, I think you're going to get them." And the door opened, and out came a dog, their little Sandy, the dog, came out. "We want the bride. We want the groom." And the door opened, and out came, you know, their father. Everybody came out the door until finally the door was held open, and out came Edna and Stanley Gover, the new bride and groom. And they had a party. All the food and the music and the dancing. And that's what happened when my grandmother and grandfather, Edna and Stanley Gover, got married in the early 1900s on a farm in Harford County. Well, that story my grandmother would tell me or tell the children as they gathered, and we would sit and listen and wait until we could go and play again. And she would say, "Okay, go out and play, and don't make as much noise as they made when we got married." And then we would go out and play, and we would play on the exact same lawn where that wedding celebration was held. Except for some of us would go and quietly sit and listen to grown folks talk. That's what they called it, when the adults were talking and they knew the children were off playing and nowhere to hear what was being said. Now that's what happened to Alex Haley when he learned his family history. He loved to sit on the porch with his grandmother and his great aunts as they talked about the olden days. Now, just like us, Alex Haley, he was born in 1921, would sit quietly in a corner and not make any noise because he wanted to hear what they had to say. And what they had to say was very interesting. They talked about the old African who, when he was brought from Africa, told everyone that his name was Kente. And he told them about an instrument. When he saw a guitar, he said, "Ko." He called a guitar Ko. And then when he saw the river running by the farm where he was held in slavery, he called that Combo Belango. Combo Belango. Combo Belango. And how did Alex Haley's grandmother and great aunt come to know that? Because they had been listening when they were children. They listened to their parents, and their parents had listened to their parents. And that story had passed down through all of their family, and everyone knew about the African whose name was Kente, who called a guitar Ko, who called a river Combe Belongo. When Alex Haley grew up, he joined the Coast Guard, and he learned to love to write with a portable typewriter, not like your computers. He would write articles and stories for magazines, and that became his new job when he left the Coast Guard. And then one day, Alex Haley decided to find out more about this Kente, the African. And he found out that that was a family name in the African country of the Gambia. Alex Haley took a trip to Africa. And after a few days, he found out that it was a griot who could tell him about this family called Kente. He had to gather together interpreters and musicians. They said the griot wouldn't talk unless there was music. And then he had to gather food together because he had to go up a river to a small town called Jufure. And there, as the people gathered under a baobab tree and the musicians played, from out of one of the huts came a small old man in a white gown with a kufi hat on. And this was the griot. And he looked at Alex Haley because he couldn't believe it. He said to the interpreter, "Our forefathers told us that there were our people who had been taken away, and now we know it is true," because he could see Alex Haley. And so he began to tell the story of the Kente family that began in Old Mali and moved down to the Gambia. And just like Alex Haley's grandmother had said, there was a son of Omaro Kente who had gone off one day to chop wood and to make a drum. And he was captured and taken away. Alex Haley couldn't believe it. This was the same story. And now he had been hearing it for years from his grandmother. And now this old man in Africa was telling the exact same story. Alex Haley had come home. He had joined his families together. His American family and his African family now came together. They knew that they belonged to each other. And that's what can happen to you when you gather during the holidays. Your family can come together and get to know each other and to share those stories from the past and the present that will help you go on to the future. As your storyteller, I have been blessed to have gone to Africa and to have gone to that town of Jufere where Alex Haley went, and to see those small buildings that are there where the Kente family lived and loved and worked. And so now it's your turn to tell a story, to share your roots, just as Alex Haley did. And you might want to check out the book Roots and find out what that story is like. But for today, that ends our storytelling circle. And we hope you'll come back another time and listen for the sound of the drums and the sound of the shakere. And come join us for the Griot's Storytelling Circle with your storyteller, Sister Martha Ruff.